The reading this morning is taken from Luke chapter 24, verses 1 to 12, and you may also find it on page 1061 in the Pew Bibles. On the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared and went to the tomb. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they entered, they did not find the body of Jesus Christ. While they were wondering about this, suddenly 2 men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood beside them. In their fright, the women bowed down with their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, he has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still with you in the Galilee? The Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of sinners, be crucified, and on the third day be raised again." Then they remembered his words. When they came back from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the others. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and others with them who told this to the apostles. But they did not believe the women, because their words seemed to them like nonsense. Peter, however, got up and ran to the tomb. Bending over, he saw the strips of linen lying by themselves, and he went away, wondering to himself what had happened. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Thank you, Hazel, very much. Now, we're going to spend a bit of time thinking about that passage, Luke chapter 24, the story of the resurrection, as Luke tells it. And to help us just get into a little bit what those women experienced on that first Easter Sunday, I need a volunteer who can come up and help me. The band of volunteers ready. Thomas, why don't you come up here? Now, Thomas, it's a very, very easy job today. All you've got to do is sit in that chair and look towards the front. And as he does that, for the rest of you, there's something, don't look there, Thomas, there's something appeared on the screen. Thank you, Thomas. You can go and sit back down. Give him a round of applause. He did very well. Now, what on earth is going on? Well, that, I think, is the message of Easter Sunday. That the women came to Jesus' tomb thinking they were coming to anoint their friend's dead body. If you were here on Good Friday, we thought a bit together, both in our all-age service and in our Hour at the Cross, about how it all ended on Good Friday with Jesus dead and buried. But the women who wanted to anoint his body, to make it so that as it was decaying, it didn't smell too bad, to care for it, they didn't have time to do it because it was the Sabbath coming, the day of rest. And so they had to leave and go back home and wait a day. But you heard, I hope, at the start of our reading this morning, on the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared, on Friday evening, and they went to the tomb. They think they're going to look after a dead body and care for it. I don't know what exactly Thomas thought he was coming up to volunteer for. What did you think you were coming here for when you came to church this morning? The women thought they were coming to, remember and care for and look after a dead body. And the shock is, not only is there no dead body there, but really the shock is the question in verse 5. In their fright, the women bowed down with their faces to the ground, but the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, he has risen." Now, it's a very strange question. Why do you look for the living among the dead? What they should have done, these angels saying, is you shouldn't have expected the dead body to be here. But that's an enormous shock for them. They can't take it in. They can't believe it. They can't understand it even. But hear what the angel says to them. He comes pretty close, I think, to telling them off. To say, you should have known better. Why are you looking for the living among? Why have you come to a tomb to meet Jesus? He's not here anymore. Because he's alive. Now, as we think about what this means for us today, it seems to me that there are a few ways in which we can still treat Jesus like these women were treating him at the start of the reading, like he's still dead. We can do the same thing. Perhaps we came here for this service. We sat down and we think, well, we're going to think, obviously we're going to talk a bit about Jesus, we're going to talk about his resurrection. But if we think about it a bit more deeply, I want to suggest two ways that we can, if we're not careful, treat Jesus the way these women did at the start of our reading. Often when you find these sort of stories in the news, this is a farmer in Norway who was just searching through his field, picking up trash, and he stumbled upon a Viking sword, and an extremely precious and valuable Viking sword. We might not have come here to church expecting to have stumbled on the best news in history, or if we did come expecting that, well, it's even better than we thought. And that's the shock. On Easter Sunday, I think we're supposed to be a bit like this farmer who didn't know what he was looking for and then suddenly found it. Even if you've become here for many years, Easter Sunday is the sort of thing that should sort of shake you up, like the explosion at the front here. So what are the ways in which we can treat Jesus like he's still dead, like these women are doing? Well, first of all, we need to think about the miracle. Because what these women are like at the start of the reading is they just do not think, do they, that Jesus has come back to life again. They don't think they're coming to anything other than a dead body. And in fact, it's the same with all of his followers. Did you hear right towards the end of the reading, verse 11? When the women come back and say, look, it's happened, something amazing has happened. They, the 11, his closest friends and followers, did not believe the women because their words seemed to them like nonsense. Now, this really matters, I think. It matters for us today because it's very easy, somewhere in our minds, to think that the first people who believed in Jesus coming back physically from the dead, being professionally executed, but being seen alive again 3 days later, it's easy to think the first people who believed in that were sort of gullible peasants. People in a long time ago, before science, before intelligence, before clever stuff, whatever. And they were prone to believe all kinds of things that we now know are nonsense. They didn't understand about the water cycle, so they believed in a God who brought the rain. They didn't, understand about the earth going around the sun. They saw the sun rise and the sun set, and they thought, oh, that's some sort of deity who we start to worship. And so it'd be very easy, you think, if you believe that there's God behind everything, and easy to believe that someone can come back from the dead, and this sort of thing happens all the time. But that's not what these first followers of Jesus were like. When his closest friends hear what the women have seen, they think it's nonsense. If you've ever had that experience of thinking about Christianity and they say, this is rubbish. This can't be true. You're in company with the very first followers of Jesus Christ. Tempting maybe to think that Easter is some kind of April Fool. Here's one of my favorite April Fools I've seen. This was from India a few years ago. McDonald's said they were going to give a glow-in-the-dark burger. Now, April Fool's Day, every now and then Easter falls on April Fool's Day, and it works really well, and you can talk about how it's a hoax. I think the next one is 2029. But April Fool's Day today, for most people, it's become sort of too obvious. You're looking for it as soon as you wake up in the morning. And actually, the interesting thing about April Fool's Day now for most people is the stories that you thought were April Fools that turned out to be true. If you like, Easter Sunday fits in that category. And don't think that it is this kind of hoax, this sort of nonsense that some kind of, credulous people believed. But what is the evidence that leads these first followers of Jesus, these skeptics, to end up not only believing in him, but going out and telling the whole world about him? Well, Luke wants to give some to us. There are two big things that Luke wants us to just think about in particular. The first is what they discover when they go to that empty tomb on Easter Sunday. Of course, they discovered there's no body there. The body's disappeared. They can't find a corpse anywhere. But notice what else they discover. Peter however, verse 12, got up and ran to the tomb. Bending over, he saw the strips of linen lying by themselves, and he went away wondering to himself what had happened. It's not quite the case that Peter finds an empty tomb. He finds a very nearly empty tomb, and the big thing obviously isn't there, the body. But Luke makes a point that Peter saw the strips of linen. Someone I know put together this little picture a few years ago, which I think sums up what's going on. So in the top left, if they were looking for a corpse, well, that's what a corpse looks like. A body in clothes lying on the floor. If a teenager, a messed up bit of clothes on the floor, if it was grave robbers, the tomb would be completely empty. They'd have come and stolen everything. But that's what Easter is. The clothes left behind, but the body not there. That's the bit of evidence that Luke particularly says, got Peter thinking, hang on, of all the possibilities here, could it be not a stolen body, a revived body, but resurrection? Someone who was killed, then seen again 3 days later in a new and transformed and glorious body. All the old stuff left behind. That's the first bit of evidence that Luke particularly draws our attention to get us to believe the miracle. Not to be looking for the living amongst the dead, because that's not where you'll find Jesus. Not to treat Jesus as someone who's still dead, but someone who's alive again. In a few moments, we're going to come back and think about the second bit of evidence to believe this miracle. But before we do that, we're going to sing again our next hymn. It's a hymn of praise for this morning, resurrection morning. So as you're able, please would you stand and we'll sing together. Acts chapter 10, beginning at verse 34. Then Peter began to speak. I now realize how true it is that God does not show favoritism, but accepts from every nation the one who fears him and does what is right. You know the message God sent to the people of Israel, announcing the good news of peace through Jesus Christ, who is Lord of all. You know what has happened throughout the province of Judea, beginning in Galilee after the baptism that John preached, how God anointed Jesus of Nazareth with the Holy Spirit and power, and how he went around doing good and healing all who were under the power of the devil, because God was with him. We are witnesses of everything he did in the country of the Jews and in Jerusalem. They killed him by hanging him on a cross, but God raised him from the dead on the third day and caused him to be seen. He was not seen by all the people, but by witnesses whom God had already chosen, by us who ate and drank with him after he rose from the dead. He commanded us to preach to the people and to testify that he is the one whom God appointed as judge of the living and the dead. All the prophets testify about him, that everyone who believes in him receives forgiveness of sins through his name. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So we've been thinking about this miracle that Jesus Christ really did rise from the dead. And the grave clothes and the fact there's no body in the tomb is that bit of evidence that Luke wants us to think about. This really happened. These weren't gullible peasants. They were skeptics, but they came to believe in it. There's another bit of evidence to notice in that reading from Luke 24. We might not have thought much about it, but it's in verse 10. Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James. The fact that Luke names the very first people who were there and who saw that the tomb was empty. Now that really matters for Luke because he's named these women, people who read his gospel could go and investigate it for themselves. That's basically what Peter says in that speech in the book of Acts, that there were witnesses, and he was one of them, as we've heard in our Luke reading. And you can come and ask us and press us and see if the story stacks up. You might think of it this way. If I told you that in 1895, someone on the first tee at the golf club next door hit a shot, hit a drive, and it bounced off 3 trees and landed in the hole, you would be amazed, and straight away you would doubt that that could possibly have happened. Even Rory McIlroy couldn't drive that far, you think. Even the luckiest person in the world couldn't bounce off 3 trees. The really clever ones among you would say, well, Edgbaston Golf Club wasn't founded till 1896, so there's no chance. Or maybe it was some myth. Maybe someone did that, I say. And, trust me, that's what happened. Nonsense. What if I told you, though, in 1995, someone hit a ball off the first tee, 3 trees, and into the hole? Now, you'd be as skeptical, but you could go and find out who booked in to play that day. Who was a member of the golf club in the 90s? Who was the captain? Who was in charge? You could go and find those people and ask them, look, I've heard this crazy story. Surely it didn't happen. And of course, you'd find out it didn't. That's sort of what Luke's doing here. Here are the people, these women, these first followers. Luke's gospel was written that kind of 30-ish, 40-ish years after the event. So if there weren't people still alive, there were people who knew the people who had been alive. Do you see the point? Why do you look for the living among the dead? This isn't a hoax. This isn't a legend. This isn't a sort of just so story, a fairy tale that's been pumped up. This happened. Don't be like the women and go looking for the dead. Look for the living. Look for Jesus Christ. But there's another way, I think, that we maybe can, make the same mistake the women make. Look for the living among the dead. We can treat Jesus as if he's still dead by thinking that the resurrection didn't happen. But we can also treat Jesus as if he's still dead by not understanding what it means. Because do you notice what the angel says to the women? In verse 5, why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, he is risen. So far, well, that makes sense. But then he says something else. Remember how he told you while he was still with you in Galilee, the Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of sinners, be crucified, and on the third day be raised again. Why does the angel remind them of something that Jesus said while he was still with them? Well, it's all about that word must in verse 7. The Son of Man must be delivered over. That's a crucial word. Think of the difference between your mum or your dad saying to you, you can come down for dinner now, and you must come down for dinner now. You can come down for dinner means, carry on building your Lego, carry on playing whatever you're playing, and at some point soon you can come down and have your tea. You must come down for dinner. There's some force behind it. Your room will be tidied by the end of the day. It sounds like someone else is going to come and tidy it for you. Your room must be tidied. Well, there's some force. I'd better go and tidy it then. What the angel is reminding the women of, those words of Jesus before he was killed, it wasn't just that Jesus had died, but that Jesus had to die. There was a plan, there was intention, there was some force behind this. And he wants to remind them of it on the day of the resurrection. Because unless they understand that this was a plan, they won't understand how enormous the event that has just happened. Now, I'm going to try and illustrate this, but in a way that some of you might feel a bit triggered by, because I've got here a very familiar sight for us all at the moment in Birmingham, a bin. And you can't see it, but the bin is full because it hasn't been collected for a while. Now, perhaps you've had this experience in your house where, if you've read the official guidance, we should put our bins out as normal on the day they're supposed to be collected. So you put them out by the road and you go away. And this is what I've been doing every day. As I walk past, just open it, no, they still haven't been collected, go back in the house or go back on with my day. That's our experience at the moment in Birmingham. So, some people, they have their bin bags are overflowing. What will happen the day when you walk down your drive or walk out the front and you open it and it's empty? I mean, that will be something to celebrate. At last, someone's come and picked up my bins. If you like, what happens on Resurrection Sunday is that, you go and lift up the tomb and it's empty. And it's the best news in the world, even better than the bin strike being over. And the reason is because what it means. When we open the bin lid and we see there's nothing in there at last, The rubbish is gone. It's been taken away. In the book of 2 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul wrote these words, God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. If we just think that the resurrection is a kind of great party trick, wow, look at Jesus showing how powerful he is, we've missed what this angel says is the key thing about it. Remember what he told you. The Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of sinners. There was a plan here. And Paul lays out what the plan was, and it's an extraordinary one. That if you like, all the ways that I reject God and turn my back on him, it's like filling up the bin with all the rubbish. But look what Paul says. All the ways that I turn my back on God and reject him, into the bin. God made him who had no sin to be sin for us. All that gets piled on top of Jesus on the cross. But on resurrection morning, the tomb is empty. It's all been taken away. I could try to work out, is there some magic trick I could do to make all this rubbish disappear? There's no way I can do it. But that's the wonder of Easter. That's why Easter is such good news. The tomb is empty. If you trust in Jesus Christ, all of the things that separate you from God, all of that rubbish, taken away forever. That's why it's the most thrilling and joyful day for Christians. That's why we sing Alleluia. That's why we rejoice and celebrate. So don't think that Jesus is dead still, either by disbelieving in the resurrection. You know, it's hard to believe. These first people who believed it found it hard. But there's good reason to believe it. And don't miss the amazing meaning of it. The tomb is empty. Your sin, if you trust in Jesus, has been paid for altogether. It's taken away forever. And you can come and know God and enjoy him with all the joy that he brings. I'm going to go and wash my hands because I've been touching a bin. We're going to stand and sing our next hymn. It's a hymn in which we'll take our collection to support the work of this church, both here and around the world and in other places. So if you'd like to give towards that work, you're very welcome to do so.